Right, how are we doing everybody, and welcome to Russell Heritage Golf. Today is a discussion on the easiest way to swing a golf club. And what I mean by this is that physically it's the easiest way to swing a golf club. So what I've been talking about in the first part of this little series was the backswing position and what to do if you're physically limited. Then I talked about the downswing. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to kind of put it all together, the backswing, the downswing and the hit itself, in terms of things that you want to be trying to do. The reality of the situation is that basically you need to be careful with this. I'm not making the assumption, although in the tagline will be seniors, I'm not making the assumption that every senior I meet is physically limited, right? Some people still have a great range of motion. As much as I sometimes meet some 20-year-olds who haven't actually got as good range of motion as some of the older guys. So the thing is that you just need to make sure, like I've discussed in these little series, that they're things that are applicable to you. Now, the first thing to understand is that what's really important in the backswing position is that you get the shoulders towards a 90-degree rate of rotation. So as I've kind of talked about this, it's important because it gives you the best chance of coming down and bringing the club on the correct sort of plane, which means down in this sort of direction rather than coming over the top. Now, some golfers out there will be able to get their shoulders to a 90-degree rotation without excessively having to turn the hips. Other golfers will have to increase the amount of rotation of the hips to allow the shoulders to get to 90 degrees. So that's the first thing that I talked about in more detail in the first video. My second point really was that when you start to allow the hips to kind of turn, is just to make sure that you're keeping pressure in the ground. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to start lifting up in the backswing position because it starts to become problematic. So you still want to feel like you're putting pressure down in towards the ground in this backswing position. Now, one of the things that tends to kind of mess up how your hips are moving on the way back is what you're trying to do with your upper body. So when I talked about this split handle exercise, which was this one, it kind of gave you an indication as to what would feel comfortable. And basically the summary of that exercise was this arm, so your trail arm, is trying to help this arm stay straight and elevate it in the air. That's generally what is trying to happen in the backswing position. So that's all that's important, because I meet a lot of golfers that are trying to elevate their arm more in the air because they've been told they swing it too short, and then they start to pull their arm up, but they start to drift forward. You know, there's absolutely no benefit. If you're starting to move forward and you don't rotate and put pressure in the ground, then you're going to have complications sequencing your downswing. I've also seen golfers that are trying to get the club more on plane because they don't like the look of the shaft being vertical. But the reality is that they can't create an external shoulder rotation, so they can't get into this sort of position with comfort anyway. So that's why the shaft will always look more vertical, because the arm or the elbow hasn't got the ability to do this. Again, it doesn't matter, because like I said in that second series, even if the shaft is a little bit vertical, as long as you drive your elbow down, then it will create a shallowing on the shaft anyway. Now, what is important is just to understand what you're going to do to start your downswing. And as I talked about in that second series, is have you got the ability to create a separation? Okay? If you can create a separation, which means you can independently move your lower body apart from your upper body moving, then that basically means you can adhere to being more orthodox. If you can't separate your lower body and it means that your upper body works at the same rate of rotation, then all you need to be mindful of in your golf swing is just when you start to rotate in the downswing, is just to make sure that you're driving your elbow down at the same rate as you're turning to help you keep the club on plane and to stop you from swinging over the top. And generally speaking, if you can do those things, what will start to happen is that you'll have a backswing where you're comfortable, right? You don't feel like you're stretching and you're in strain. You'll have a lead arm which is nice and straight because that's what this hand is doing. You'll have a club face which is parallel towards the back of your hand, which again is important because I see so many golfers that are trying to lay the club off, or they're trying to introduce wrist lock and they can't physically do it, or they start to let go of the club. And then when they start to let go of the club, the arm starts to bend. But also when they start to let go of the club, they start to allow the club face to open. And then all of a sudden you've got to time this regrip, and it's almost impossible to get the club face under control. So if you have a backswing where you're comfortable, but you make sure that your right palm is putting pressure on your left thumb, then the club face will be square towards the back of your lead wrist. Your arm will be helping facilitate keeping this straight. Your elbow will be in the air to a degree on whatever range of motion you have. As you start the downswing, you're going to start turning, but you're going to drive the right elbow to the side of you. All you need to do now is two things, okay? The release is arguably natural, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. The release basically means as I start to come in towards this downswing position, what you have to do is that you have to make sure, as you can see, I've used the shaft on the floor here to represent my target line. Now, what this means is that by the time I get to about, let's say when the shaft is kind of parallel placed, is that I have to kind of make sure that the shaft continues to point down towards the target line to make sure I'm on plane. That would be my first piece of advice, because what I tend to see with golfers when they start driving the elbow is that they start to potentially get the club under plane, and then they feel like this is okay, but then they start missing. Then you start to do things like release the club, okay, and you start to twist the face, and then you're kind of taught that this feels more powerful, but it's not. If you start to contort and manipulate the face in this way, all of a sudden you're just going to start to get a huge amount of discrepancy in your game. My little piece of advice really is that, and I see this with the better golfers that I teach that are either physically limited or they're golfers of a certain age that can't demonstrate the connection. And what I mean by this is that their lead arm stays pretty straight going through. Don't get me wrong, there'll be an element of bending in this arm as they swing through, but it stays pretty straight, especially through the hitting area. Now, one of the things that's very difficult to do, whether you're supple or not, is keep this hand working at the same rate of speed as this hand. So when I talked about the backswing position, I talked the importance of keeping the hands connected so it doesn't start to manipulate the face. But what you'll actually find is that if you have a go and just turn the club upside down so it's not too heavy, it's actually much easier to swing all the way through when it's just your lead arm on the club. Okay, now the reason for this is because my lead shoulder has the chance just to work up and behind my body, and what you can see is that as long as I allow my ankle to roll, it means I can turn all the way through, and it's an important thing because it helps you generate power, but it also helps you stay nice and balanced and helps you control that low point. And my point is, the better golfers that I see that are trying to allow this arm to still speed up, this is why it's absolutely fine at this stage in the impact area to start to have a regrip. And the reason why I'm talking about this is that it's fine to hit the ball in this sort of manner to the point where you feel like this hand is coming off. You don't have to, in the hit, feel like your trail hand is really dominating and staying in contact, because what it can potentially do is kind of slow this arm down, and it also encourages you to start flipping a little bit much. So my advice to get the feeling for that would be to just do some swings as I demonstrated. Lead arm only, and you'll notice the way that your lead arm can work through at a nice pace. Like I said, it's very difficult for this arm to keep up with that, which is why it generally kind of slows it down. But the problem is that if you're trying to actively do anything with your trail arm, like roll or even maybe flip, then that's when you're going to start to have a problem. So those are my kind of advice really towards the golfer. And if we kind of summarize it, the backswing, make sure you turn your hips to 90 degrees, okay? Make sure that you're comfortable and you're not doing anything that you physically can't actually adopt in the top of the backswing position. As you start the downswing, understand if you can create any separation. If not, then make sure that you start to drive the right elbow down. Understand that depends on how fast you swing the golf club would have to kind of, for you to determine when you should feel like you release the club. There's no definitive point as to when you should do it. It will feel different to every golfer depending on the speed as to which you swing. But just understand that the general concept is that as you come in towards this hitting area, the shaft should always be pointing down towards your ball to target line, because it helps the club face come down square, and it just naturally allows you to move through with the club. My last little piece to the puzzle is to make sure that you keep rotating and keep turning, right? Make sure that you allow this ankle to roll, because it will take pressure off your lower back rather than finishing this way. I see a lot of golfers that are like this in their golf swing, and then they're trying to compensate by flipping. But then as soon as you start flipping, you might like the odd kind of drawy shot that you get, but you start getting flippier and flippier. And what's starting to happen is this arm can't work through at the same speed because this hand is actively holding it back. So hopefully this series on what to do with less flexible golfers helps you. It's always something I can come back to in the future as well. Remember, it's absolutely free to subscribe to this channel, right? Press the little bell icon, means you'll receive notifications every time a new video comes out. What's also absolutely free is to send swings into the channel, right? So in the description below is where my social media links are, and basically I annotate over the videos that come in and I republish them back onto my social media sites. What's also free is to give me a thumbs up, always appreciate that as well, and I'll catch up with you guys soon.